Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take a whole stack of sources, articles, research, history texts, and we really try to boil it all down to the essential knowledge you need.
Get you right up to speed.
Exactly. And today, we're tackling something pretty big. The way law, justice, and crucially, social status work together, or maybe against each other in the ancient world. We're going to look at Greece and Rome, but maybe try and get past just the famous ideals, democracy, the republic.
Oh, highlight reel.
And look at the messier side, the power dynamic.
That's really the core question, isn't it? We're taught these lofty principles, but when you dig into the sources, you have to ask, who did the law actually serve?
Yeah.
And how much did your place in society decide whether the law protected you or, whether it was used against you?
A shield or a weapon.
Precisely. We'll see how status, whether you were a top Roman official, a clever Athenian citizen trying to manage things, or someone enslaved with basically no legal standing, how that status dictated everything.
It's all about that privilege and vulnerability. So, okay, start this off. We need to get the concept straight. Let's begin in Rome. There's this term, officium, Cicero's term.
Right.
And usually it just gets translated as duty. But the sources we looked at suggest it's too simple. It misses a lot.
It really does. It misses the political dimension, the moral sorting going on. Officium isn't just one thing. It's more like a way of categorizing appropriate actions.
Okay.
Cicero knew or argued that you couldn't realistically hold everyone to the exact same moral benchmark. Not necessarily because people were inherently good or bad, but because their roles, their capacities in society were different.
So he needed different levels of expectation.
Exactly. He sets up this tiered system. And what it does implicitly is link how ethically high you're expected to aim with where you sit in the Roman social structure.
Okay, so let's break down the tiers. The top level.
That's the officium perfectum.
Perfectum.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it means something like completely accomplished or thoroughly done. And this is where Cicero borrows directly from Greek philosophy, specifically the idea of katertoma.
Katertoma, what's that?
It signifies the entirely appropriate action, the absolute ideal. And Cicero says this is reserved for the pursuit of true virtue, the kind only the wise man can really achieve.
The philosopher sage type.
Pretty much. It's the gold standard. Very few people are actually expected to hit this mark. It's aspirational,
Okay, so if that's the peak for the wise few, what about, regular folks, the average citizen?
That's where the officium medium comes in, sometimes called commune.
Medium?
Middling.
Exactly. Cicero uses the Greek term melzon here, middling, or ordinary. This is the standard for the ordinarily or commonly appropriate action.
Who's this aimed at?
This is linked directly to the political virtue expected of a standard citizen, the person involved in public life doing their civic part. Okay, hold on. If the perfectum, the entirely appropriate action, is really only for the wise man who's probably, let's be honest, an elite guy with time to think, doesn't that basically give the average person, the medium guy, a pass? Like, you don't really have to strive for true moral perfection, just be ordinarily appropriate.
It's a really sharp point.
Isn't that just building elite privilege right into the moral code?
You've hit on it. This distinction isn't just grading actions, it's kind of grading people based on their expected station. By saying the ordinary citizen should aim for medium, it acknowledges, that the highest standards are functionally expected only from the few.
The ones with the time, the education.
Right, the ones who theoretically can reach for perfectum.
Yeah.
For most people, just doing your civic duty, acting appropriately in a common way, that counts as success. It basically formalizes kind of dual moral track based on your status.
That feels very Roman. Orderly, hierarchical. Okay, let's shift gears. Go over to Athens. Aristotle, who's also obsessed with order, right? Taxis.
Deeply obsessed. But his angle was maybe less about individual moral perfection and more about preventing political meltdown.
He thought people were naturally messy.
Oh, yeah. He had this view that human nature leans towards disorder, even anarchy. So law was absolutely vital to impose taxi structure, order onto this potential chaos.
But he had worries about democracy itself, even Athenian democracy.
Big worries. His nightmare scenario was what he called an extreme democratic society.
Meaning?
Where the demos, the common people, put themselves above the laws and the magistrates. He thought if that happened, the whole structure, the taxis, would just dissolve.
So democracy could become its own kind of tyranny.
That's exactly how he saw it, the tyranny of the masses. He was afraid the people, driven by short-term desires, might just overturn established rules whenever they felt like it. Chaos.
Okay, so if pure democracy was potentially dangerous in his view, what was his ideal? What kind of state worked best?
He advocated for a mixed constitution, something that blended elements of oligarchy rule by the few, usually the wealthy, and democracy.
A balance of power.
Exactly. The idea was to set up checks and balances. Let the different classes, the rich and the poor, keep each other in check. He explicitly said this was needed to guard against the evil which is innate in every human being. It's quite a statement.
Wow. So for Aristotle, law wasn't primarily about, say, individual freedom, but more about controlling inherent human flaws, especially in politics.
That's a good way to put it. It was a necessary cage for our worst impulses. And you see this dramatic tension, the struggle from chaos to some kind of order, played out incredibly vividly in Athenian tragedy.
Like the Oresteia.
Aeschylus's Oresteia is the classic example. It's basically a story about how justice itself evolves. It maps the journey from primitive blood vengeance.
Eye for an eye.
Right, within the family, to a more formal state-run judicial system.
And the Furies are central to that. Tell us about their journey. They start out terrifying.
Absolutely terrifying. They are the embodiment of that primal blood vengeance. Ancient Chthonic deities whose job is to hunt down anyone who spills kindred blood. They operate outside the city's laws initially.
But that system just leads to endless cycles of violence.
Which Aeschylus shows is completely unsustainable for a polis, for a functioning city-state. It just creates more and more killing.
So the state has to step in. How does it handle these tribal forces? Does it crush them?
No, and this is the genius of it. It doesn't crush them. It incorporates them. It institutionalizes them.
How?
By the end of the trilogy, the Furies are transformed. Their role shifts. They go from being agents of family revenge to being guardians of social order within the household and the city.
And they get a place of honor.
A permanent, respected place on the Acropolis itself. They become the Seisachtheia, the revered goddesses worshipped in Athens.
That's an amazing piece of political myth-making. The state doesn't destroy divine justice. It sort of tames it, channels it.
Assimilates it, yeah. Turns that potentially chaotic divine energy into a force for civic stability. It shows justice wasn't some fixed, abstract thing.
It was negotiated.
Constantly. Between gods, humans, the needs of the state. Blame and responsibility were always in flux. Think about it. The Furies are agents of Zeus, but they're initially shown opposing Apollo.
Who is also an agent of Zeus.
Exactly. That contradiction highlights just how complex even the divine framework was supposed to be, reflecting the messy human struggle to build a stable society.
Okay, so we've got the philosophical frameworks, the ideals, and the anxieties in Greece and Rome. Now let's really dive into the Roman reality, because here, status isn't just influencing the law. Sometimes it feels like status is the law. We have to talk about Roman elite privilege and how provincial administration basically became a system for institutionalized exploitation.
Yeah, this flows directly from how Rome built its empire through conquest. Governing the provinces wasn't like, say, Athenian local administration. It wasn't run by professionals.
It was run by
high-status amateurs, senators, ex-consuls, ex-praetors, guys from the ruling class.
And they didn't serve for long, did they?
Usually just a year, maybe two. Very short terms.
Why was that short term so significant?
Because it shaped their whole approach. For many of these governors, it wasn't primarily about public service in the province. It was a strategic move in their Roman career. It was seen as a crucial temporary window, an opportunity to seriously boost their status back in Rome, and maybe even more importantly, to make a lot of money.
Right, because getting elected to high office in Rome was incredibly expensive. They were often deep in debt.
Exactly. They might have bankrupted themselves campaigning. The province was their chance to recoup those losses, and then some. It was like their personal financial recovery zone, backed by state power.
So the state itself is kind of enabling personal profiteering. And the scale of this profit, according to our sources, was pretty staggering.
It was huge. We read that a governor, even one who was relatively careful, not overtly greedy,
just skimming a reasonable amount,
right, could still make enough profit in one single year to set his family up comfortably for generations.
Wow. And how did they do it? Where did the money come from?
Two main avenues. First, supervising taxation. That was ripe for manipulation over collection, unfair assessments, deals with tax farmers.
Okay.
And second, the dispensation of justice. Basically selling legal decisions, favoring allies, imposing arbitrary fines. Justice itself became a commodity.
It's corruption built into the very structure. But surely the people in the provinces weren't happy about this. They must have complained.
They did, loudly and often enough that eventually Rome had to respond, at least pretend to.
So they set up a court.
Yes, in 149 DC, they established the first permanent judicial tribunal, the Quaestio de Repetundis. Its specific job was to hear complaints from provincials about illegal extortion by governors.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds like progress. Accountability.
It looks like it, a step towards reining in the governors.
But there's a catch, isn't there? The sources point to a kind of dark irony here.
There's a huge catch. What's really fascinating and cynical is that this tribunal didn't really stop extortion. Instead, it ended up sort of establishing the rules of the game.
What do you mean?
By defining what counted as illegal extortion, the kind you could actually get prosecuted for, it implicitly created a category of acceptable extortion.
The level you could get away with.
Exactly. It set a kind of baseline. Okay, governors are going to enrich themselves, that's expected, but don't go too far, don't be too blatant, or you might end up in court. It normalized a certain amount of official theft as just, perks of the job.
So it created a ceiling for the crime rather than eliminating it.
Pretty much. And even if a governor did get hauled before this tribunal, getting a conviction was another story entirely.
Because the courts themselves were political battlegrounds.
Completely. These tribunals weren't neutral zones of justice. They were dominated by Roman domestic politics. The senators sitting on the juries, they owed favors, they had alliances, they had enemies.
So personal connections trumped the actual evidence.
Almost always. Loyalty to your friends, your patrons, your political faction that often mattered more than the formal rule of law. Being successful in elite Roman society required this network. You had to aggressively help your friends and expect help in return.
So if your buddy, the ex-governor, is accused of stripping a province bare, your social code, your political survival, might demand you protect him, regardless of what he actually did.
That was the reality. And this is where the law stops being even notionally about justice and becomes purely a tool, a weapon. The most infamous example, of course, is Verres.
Cicero's big case. Verres, the governor of Sicily.
Textbook case. Verres wasn't just about profit, though he made plenty. He used his power with real malice to destroy people he saw as rivals or obstacles.
Tell us about what he did to Senius. That episode is chilling.
Senius was a prominent Sicilian, clearly someone Verres wanted out of the way. Verres cooked up a charge of forgery against him, but the way he pursued it shows the absolute contempt for process.
What happened?
Senius wasn't even there. He was away from his estates. Did Verres wait? No. He sent the police, messengers, guys on horseback, a whole state apparatus to publicly search Senius's property. Total intimidation theater.
And then the next day?
The very next day, Verres sits on his official tribunal seat, the symbol of Roman justice, and declares Senius guilty of forgery. In absentia. Without a defense, without Senius even being present.
And the punishment?
A crushing fine. 5,000 pounds, an enormous sum back then. And Verres specified it had to be paid to the temple of Our Lady of Eryx.
Wait, he didn't just take the money, he gave it to a temple.
That's the twisted brilliance, isn't it? He ruins his enemy financially, but makes it look like he's being pious and supporting local religion. Politically savvy, utterly cynical. He then immediately orders the sale of Senius's property to cover the fine.
But he wasn't done with Senius even then.
Not even close. Right after imposing the fine from that same official chair, Verres announces something truly terrifying. He publicly states that if anyone wants to prosecute Senius on a capital charge, a charge carrying the death penalty, even though Senius is absent, Verres will grant permission.
He's basically putting a state-sanctioned hit out on the guy.
He's inviting prosecution, greenlighting his destruction. He wasn't just bankrupting him, he was trying to eliminate him. And when you have that kind of power, backed by consular allies and praetors back in Rome intimidating potential witnesses, well, it shows you what law meant for someone like Verres. It was just another tool in his kit.
Okay, that Roman picture is pretty bleak. Status used to institutionalize profit, exploit provincials, destroy rivals. Now let's swing back to Athens. Because for the wealthy there, the tension was almost the opposite, right? Not how to use the law for profit, but how to escape the law's financial demands.
Exactly. We're moving into the world of Athenian public duty. Now, in Athens, being a citizen wasn't optional. It came with very clear orders and obligations.
There was a strong ideology pushing this.
Oh, absolutely. A powerful civic ideal about voluntary and spontaneous is good citizenship. You should want to serve the city, contribute willingly. It was almost a religious duty.
People are people, especially when their money is on the line. Ideology only goes so far.
That's the reality. The sources make it clear that legal mechanisms, compulsion, were absolutely necessary. You needed laws to force citizens to do their military service and, crucially, to meet their financial obligations.
That was a constant game.
A constant game. The community, the demos, was always trying to come up with regulations to ensure contributions, and the wealthy citizens were always employing their own shrewdness, as the sources put it, to try and dodge those regulations, cat and mouse.
And the main battleground was the liturgies. These were the big financial burdens on the rich, right? Explain those.
The liturgies were a huge deal. For a wealthy Athenian, this was the central problem. How do I maintain my fortune, which is the basis of my elite status, my lifestyle, my influence?
Keep up appearances.
Exactly, when the state keeps demanding massive chunks of it for public service.
And these weren't like small charitable donations.
Not at all. These could be financially crippling. We're talking about things like the trierarchy.
Funding a warship.
Funding and commanding a trireme, a warship, for an entire year. Imagine asking one rich person today to personally pay for and operate a modern naval vessel for a year. That's the scale.
Wow. What else?
The choregia. Funding and training the chorus for the big religious festivals like the Dionysia. This was hugely expensive, a massive public display, but also a way to gain political prestige.
And taxes, too.
Yes, the aisphora, a property tax levied mainly during wartime. So these duties were significant and legally mandatory.
So, faced with these demands, how did the rich Athenians try to protect their wealth?
With, as our sources say, considerable shrewdness and canniness, they became experts at minimizing their exposure.
What were the strategies?
The main goal seems to have been to make these public payments, if they absolutely had to, only out of what they considered their surplus as wealth.
Not touching the core capital.
Precisely. Protect the main fortune at all costs. There's a line in Xenophon where Socrates praises a guy who is so well managed that he has enough to spare that he often undertakes liturgies for the city.
To spare. That's the key phrase.
It really is. It implies you only contribute from the overflow, the excess, keeping the foundation of your wealth and therefore your status intact.
And did the Athenian state make it easy or hard to evade? Was there a lot of oversight?
Well, Athens didn't have a huge modern-style bureaucracy. Record-keeping was limited compared to today.
So it was easier to hide assets, maybe? Underreport income?
Successful tax evaders tend not to leave many records, right? And there was certainly widespread public suspicion. The average Athenian suspected that officials could be influenced, that the rich were using connections.
Same dynamic as Rome, just maybe less blatant.
Less about outright extortion, more about subtle evasion and using influence. The public definitely believed the elite were constantly scheming to avoid paying their fair share. It created this ongoing tension, this cycle of suspicion and attempted evasion.
Okay, we've looked at the top, the Roman governor exploiting the system, the Athenian trying to shield his wealth from it. Now we have to go to the other end of the spectrum, the bottom, the legal reality for the unfree, for enslaved people.
Yes, when we look at slavery, particularly in the Roman world, status isn't just a factor in how the law applies to you. Status defines your entire legal existence or lack thereof. You are property.
And the law reflects that cold reality, like the Lex Aquilia.
The Lex Aquilia dealt with wrongful damage to property. And when it came to enslaved people, it defined liability purely in economic terms for the owner.
So if someone killed or injured an enslaved person, how was the compensation calculated? Was it just their market price?
Oh, it was often much more than that. It wasn't just the price tag of the slave. The law aimed to compensate the master for their total economic loss.
Which could include?
It included the slave's market value, sure, but also any prospective profit the master lost because of the slave's death or injury. And this is where you see the property logic really starkly.
Give us an example of that prospective profit.
Okay, imagine an enslaved person was named as an heir in someone else's will, maybe a former master or someone they'd served. This happened.
Right.
If that slave was killed before their current master could formally accept that inheritance through the slave, which could be a huge amount of money, the person who killed the slave would be liable not just for the slave's price, but for the full value of that lost inheritance.
Because the slave was the conduit for that wealth to the master.
Exactly. The slave was an economic instrument, The loss wasn't about the human being, it was about the financial damage to the owner's bottom line.
And this property status created a fundamental legal difference between how injury to a slave and injury to a free person was treated, right? Even in the language of the law.
Absolutely fundamental. It comes down to a core Roman legal idea.
Hmm.
No one is deemed to be the owner of his own limbs. A free person owns themselves. Their body isn't property in the legal sense. So if a free person was injured by someone else, they couldn't use the direct action under the Seisachtheia because that was for damaged property. They had to use a workaround, an actio, utilis, an action on the analogy of the Aquilian law. It recognized they suffered harm, but not as damaged goods.
But if an enslaved person was injured,
The owner had a direct action. Straightforward claim under the Seisachtheia. Why? Because the slave was legally property. The injury to the slave was, in the eyes of the law, no different from someone breaking your cart or killing your ox.
it's compensating the owner for damaged property, not the person for their suffering.
Precisely. That distinction just throws the huge gap between the protected citizen and the legally vulnerable chattel into sharp relief.
And this legal vulnerability, this property status, it obviously translates into the physical reality they faced, the threat of violence.
Constant threat. The sources give us some telling comparisons about what level of violence was considered acceptable.
Like with teachers.
Yeah, there's a Roman legal maxim that says excessive brutality on the part of a teacher is blameworthy. If a teacher beat a freeborn student so badly they damaged the kid's eye, for example, the teacher could be liable under the Seisachtheia.
Why? Because they damaged the child's future potential, their value?
Kind of, yes. It recognized harm to the free person's future. There was a line, even if it was blurry, for violence against the freeborn.
Okay, contrast that with the unfree or even just social inferiors.
The violence there could be instant, casual, degrading. There's an account of an employee of a Roman knight, not even necessarily enslaved, maybe just a lower status free person getting slapped right across the face simply for getting too close, for invading his superior's personal space.
Just like that. A physical assertion of dominance.
Exactly. Immediate physical reinforcement of the hierarchy. Who has the right to strike and who must endure it? It's social control through casual violence.
And we even see this reflected in popular entertainment, like Athenian comedies.
Yes, look at Menander's play, The Samia. There's a scene where the master is furious with his slave, Parmenon. And what are the threats?
What is he threatening with?
A horsewhip first, pretty standard brutality. But then, even worse, branding, being marked like livestock. And Parmenon's response is this sarcastic comment calling the threat not very elegant.
A dark joke, because he knows it's a real possibility.
It shows that these weren't empty threats. Masters used the whip, used branding for things like insolence, not just major crimes. It demonstrates the constant, normalized threat of severe physical violence that hung over the enslaved.
There's one more really strange legal wrinkle involving slaves and oaths. It almost seems contradictory.
It's a fascinating, very specific situation. Normally, of course, a slave's word meant nothing in court. They
Right.
couldn't testify in the usual way. But there was this one exception with oaths in debt cases.
How did that work?
Okay, say someone sued your master for a debt. If that other party, the plaintiff, chose to tender an oath to your slave, basically, daring the slave to swear that the master didn't owe the money.
The slave could actually take that oath.
Yes. And if the slave did swear that no debt was due, the case was over. The master got the defense conceded, just based on the slave's oath.
That seems powerful for someone with no legal standing. What was the catch?
The catch was for the person who offered the oath to the slave. The law said that person can answer to himself for tendering an oath to a slave.
Meaning it was a risky move for them.
Hugely risky. By choosing to rely on the slave's sacred word, treating their oath as binding even though they weren't a full legal person, the plaintiff was taking a gamble. If the slave lied under oath, perjury, the consequences would likely fall on the slave, maybe punishment from the master or the gods, but the master still won the case.
So the master could use the slave's capacity for a sacred bond, even if they had no legal rights, as a shield in court.
Exactly. It's this weird intersection where the slave's non-legal, perhaps a religious or personal sense of obligation could be strategically deployed by the master for a purely legal advantage. A very telling loophole.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. From Cicero's ideas about duty to Aristotle's fear of chaos, the Roman governor's profit motive, the Athenians' tax struggles, and the absolute vulnerability of the enslaved. Let's try and pull some threads together in this final stretch.
Sounds good.
We saw how Roman elite success seemed to depend heavily on personal networks, favors, connections.
Absolutely. That system of patronage, you just have to look at Cicero's letters. They're full of recommendations. Help this friend get this post, lean on this guy for me, do this favor for my ally's associate.
It wasn't about abstract legal merit. It was about who you knew and who owed you.
It was about navigating that elite club, winning favors, bestowing favors. That was the currency. Law was often just one tool within that larger political and social game.
Which sounds incredibly corrupt to us, but for them it was just how things worked at that level. Now contrast that with the Athenian ideal, at least. The idea that being a good citizen required personal discipline.
A very different emphasis. In Athens, the ideal put forward, especially by philosophers like Socrates, was that good citizenship started with self-mastery. Entrusted.
Control over your own desires.
Control over bodily pleasures, food, drink, sex, laziness. Socrates called this self-control the crippus, the very foundation of all virtue, including political virtue.
The logic being, if you can't even control yourself, how can you possibly be trusted to manage the city's affairs?
Exactly. Lack of self-control was seen as a political liability. It suggested you were susceptible to bribes, to excess, to putting your own interests above the city's.
So you have this Athenian ideal of internal discipline as the base aid for good leadership and to protect the state, versus the Roman reality where external status and connections often protected leaders from accountability for their excesses, like the greedy provincial governors.
It's a stark philosophical contrast, isn't it? The Roman system often relied on external validation, your rank, your network. The Athenian ideal demanded internal discipline, at least in theory. That profit-hungry Roman governor trying to pay off his election debts looks very different from the idealized, self-restrained Athenian citizen contributing virtuously to the polis.
So wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway for us listening today, trying to understand how law worked then and maybe how it works now? We've seen status warp everything.
I think the biggest takeaway is just how profoundly different the experience of law was depending on where you stood on that social ladder. Status wasn't just a background factor, it was often the determining factor.
Protection for some, vulnerability for others.
Exactly. Whether you were in Greece or Rome, while they had these abstract ideas about justice, the application of the law was deeply, fundamentally tied to your social position. The legal system didn't just passively reflect status differences, it actively created, enforced, and codified them. It drew sharp lines between who was protected and who was exploitable.
It makes that initial distinction from Cicero, the perfectum for the wise man, the medium for the ordinary citizen, feel less like philosophy and more like social reality codified.
It really does frame it that way, doesn't it? It suggests that the expectation of achieving or even striving for true moral excellence was perhaps functionally reserved for those whose status gave them the luxury, the time, the security to even consider it.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a challenge for you, the listener.
Yeah, a question to chew on after this deep dive is done. When we look closely at any legal system, ancient or modern, are those entirely appropriate actions, that perfectum standard, ever truly expected of everyone equally?
Or is it, in practice, still something primarily expected from, or maybe even reserved for, a select few? Those whose elevated status implicitly sets the moral high ground, while everyone else is just expected to meet that more ordinary, middling standard.
It's a question about fairness, expectation, and whether the law truly aims for the same standard from everyone it governs. Something worth thinking about.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the complex intersections of law, status, and power in the ancient world.
Hope it gave you a new lens to look through.